Okay, good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Our topic is a wonderful topic. It's sexual expression in dementia. And these complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration of sponsorship with O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. And my name is Kim Bailey, and I'm a gerontologist here at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I will be your host today. Our sponsors are providing these webinars to you as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for and works with older adults. We hope that you find today's presentation especially informative and useful. We have not one, but two presenters today, and I will tell you first about Dr. Natalie Hutima. She has a PhD in human sexuality and is a trained psychologist specializing in older adults. She also serves as a registered sexologist, sex therapist, and sex educator, while also advising dissertations at the California Institute of Integral Studies. As a sex educator, she's crafted diverse training programs for long-term care, showcased her expertise as a guest speaker at national and international conferences, and authored numerous journal articles and book chapters. With over 15 years experience in long-term care, her internationally focused work centered on sexuality, aging, and consent reflects a commitment to advancing understanding and awareness. Currently residing in Boston, Natalie shares her life with her husband, 3 children, and pets, bringing a comprehensive perspective to her impactful contributions. So again, let's see, Dr. Hutima will be taking, or Dr. Hutima, excuse me, will be handling the professionals. And to handle the families, not handle them, but to respond to the families, we have Dr. Maggie Syme, and she is a registered psychologist and researcher with a specialization in older adult mental health and wellness. Her research has centered on the sexual expression and decision-making of older adults in different contexts. She is currently working at Hebrew Senior Life as a senior project director for the Marcus Institute for Aging Research and for aging research, and she's a psychologist in the Deanna and Sydney Wolk Center for Memory Health. Okay, well, I had a few stumbles on those bios, but you can see that we have just wonderful experts to guide us through this sensitive topic today. So I'm going to go off camera and turn it over to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I actually also had prepared like a little bio, but I think we can almost skip those with such a great, great way to be introduced here today. Dr. Syme and I are very grateful that we got this opportunity to discuss sexual expression in people with dementia with you today. And since we are both very interested in this topic, have done research and have written about this topic, so we would really we enjoy being here and having the opportunity to discuss this with you all. On a little general note, I have added, so I prepared a slideshow, or we have prepared a slideshow. I've added some pictures, some photos, and to the slides. And I have to say that it's not very easy to find photos of older adults that are not heterosexual or white. So I have tried, and I have added a few of those, so I just wanted to let you know. And also, when I talk about men or women, I would like you to imagine that I include people that identify as male or female or as non-binary. But yeah, to keep repeating that during my presentation, that would take up a lot of time. And so that's why I'm doing it this way. I hope that's okay with everyone. Yeah, so let me see. Next slide. Yeah, so this is kind of my story, but you already know that. I've read about it, and I think you get the slides later, so you probably can read about it if you're interested. This is Maggie. What I loved, what I didn't know, I knew she was an advocate and an anti-ageist and a dementia care provider, but that she's also a farmer's daughter. That's really nice.
Yeah, that's actually the actual street that I live on, or I grew
Oh
up on,
no, are
Simon
you
Lane.
seriously? Oh, I thought you
Yeah,
just like
they named it after us.
randomly
No,
Googled it.
no,
Oh my
no,
gosh.
that's
Oh,
that's what happens when you grow up in rural America. There's so many of your family that live on the same street that they name it after you. So
oh wow.
that's the life.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah.
All right.
So we are going to talk about sexual expression today, which is of course like a very personal subject for some folks here. So that's why in this presentation, I will just start with giving some general information on sexuality in people with dementia. And then we discussed, so we're going to go with two different groups. So the professionals will stay in this presentation room where we're in now, and the family members and the people with dementia and caregivers, folks who are like personally involved in this subject, they will go to a separate room, Zoom room, so they will be able to ask questions in like a confidence, in a confidential space. So a disclaimer today is, even though like this is like a very, well, this group is of course very broad. We have professionals, we have people personally involved, but we don't shy away with talking about sexuality. So we will talk about everything. And I believe also that's really important, as it is important to normalize sexuality in older adults. So so just, yeah, be prepared. A little disclaimer. Sometimes you see those little, I should have, oh yeah, I already put that on this slide, like the sexual content. Yeah, usually you get a little disclaimer when you look at a movie. So, um, so yeah, this is kind of like what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share what sexuality actually is, like the definition, the bias and the myths around it, the facts around it, which are very different from the bias and the myths, as you will learn, and also share something about sexuality and dementia and how to communicate about sexuality. And then I said the breakout groups, but it's actually like the one group that's going to go into a separate Zoom room, as I mentioned. I said, and then it said general Q&A, but the breakout groups are kind of meant as a Q&A session. So we will, you have all the opportunity to ask questions to Dr. Syme and to me. So what is sexuality? Well, according to the World Health Organization, they have defined it as a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being related to sexuality, which requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. And well, this is a pretty long definition, but I think, and it's fairly broad, but it is true, since sexuality is sort of like everything and nothing at the same time. So meaning that something, you know, it's kind of different for every person. So your personal definition sometimes depends on the stage in your life that you're in. So, you know, some might, if you asked about sexuality, what is sexuality? And they might like think about like sexual trauma. Some might think about IVF, that because they're trying to conceive. Some about like, how can I express myself being a gay person. Others are just about like the connection and lovemaking. And so, like I said, it kind of depends on who you ask what it is. So it's a very personal, I think everybody has their own definition of sexuality. That's totally fine, because that's true for you. So that's why I said it's everything and nothing at the same time. But examples are, it can be intercourse, can be oral sex, masturbation, genital stimulation, touch, but also just like cuddling, holding hands, flirting. So it's like a large spectrum of actual like intercourse, from like just like holding hands or falling in love or dressing nicely to impress somebody, or I don't know, doing your hair. I don't know, like it can be like a wide variety of things. Um,
Natalie, can I jump in here
yes,
for just a second?
yes, please
The
do.
and I love the WHO definition that you had too, and then fleshing this out. And I think for those of us who are both personally connected to others, but are professionals in the room, I think about the difference between the way sexuality is defined here in a very broad, open, and flexible way, which is very inclusive, right? So when we think about sexuality, in sexual medicine, if you go to a doc, they're going to say, you know, does X work? Does Y work? Does Z work? Okay, what medications do I have for those three things? And we all know that sexuality is so much more than that, because if you give me a medication and X or Y or Z works, what if I also resent my spouse? You know, what if I also had years of trauma? What if I also feel underpowered in a relationship or unempowered? Or what if I like or what pleasure is and I never really had that? So I think that I love this, Natalie, to think about how the inclusivity of this definition of sexuality broadens it for everybody who experiences it in very many different ways, and gets away from the narrowing that sexual medicine often does, and therefore this should be fixed so you're fine, right? So there are so many things under this umbrella, I think, that are both opportunities for change, but also there are hidden challenges for some folk, particularly who are outside that pretty little box, right, of what we call sex in our society for the young, the beautiful, the fit, you know, the people whose waterworks work, you know, and this really captures all of the things that everyone might think of as sex and gives that a voice. So thank you.
Thank you for that great add-on. Yeah, perfect. Yes. So this is sexuality and aging and the bias and the myths around it. So I've put this kind of like funny, or meant to be funny, picture here, as this is part of the bias that's out there. And we see a lot of these pictures. And so usually sexuality in older adults is being ridiculed, made fun of, and these like pictures pop up, sometimes even on like postcards. So you can send these to people you know as like a funny joke. And like there's like on the left side you see like all the things that I've heard people say and that come up, that like elderly people are asexual, or you can't fire up an old engine, and women, they lose their sexual interest after menopause, or use like dirty old men when they do show some sexual interest, and women over 40 shouldn't have sex. And I'm sure you will all like have heard others, and because there's a wide variety, but it all like narrows down to the same points, that older adults are generally not seen as sexual beings. And Do you
I'm
have anything
popping
to
up
add?
here again.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. No, that's
This is a soapbox. I can't help but stand up and say, we're all experiencing in various different ways ageism in our societies. Certainly, it's a global phenomenon, but in the US in particular, we've seen a lot around sexuality, and we've seen a lot against older women. We've certainly seen ageism in the political landscape, but it's a pretty big juggernaut for us in the US. And we have, it's like the last bastion of bias that's okay, right? It's okay to make fun of older adults still, but it's not okay to have many other biases, right? Or it's not politically correct or all right, but it's all right to make fun of older folk. And we see this aging sexual stigma, it crosses every domain and certainly to this. And one thing that I want to hit home here with ageism is that internalized ageism, which I think is one of the consequences that Dr. Hatima will talk about, is that over time in our society, as we get these cultural ageism messages embedded into just the fabric of who we are, we start to see those things enacted, right, and across domains. So I might feel older and feel slower and feel less capable, but it turns out from the research that we also feel less sexual if the more we ascribe to ageist myths and aging sexual stigma, the less sexual we tend to be, the less empowered sexually we tend to be. So it has real world effects for an older adult as we age across the life course and we get these messages over and over again. So part of what we do as providers for folk, right, is bust these myths, as Natalie will talk about, and talk about the effects of them, and how they keep us from engaging in something that could be pleasurable or true for us or value consistent with our lives, and just name it, right, and recognize the role that ageism has in this. So thank you.
Yeah, great. And I can piggyback on that because I do want to discuss like this bias and these myths that like are, and I'm not free of them either because I grew up in like a Western society. So I got these messages, and one of I will go to the next slide where I discuss the consequences. And one of the consequences that I put down here is that most healthcare professionals have no education in sexuality. And I have to admit that I was one of those professionals when I did my master's in psychology back in the Netherlands, where I come from, and I started working in nursing home care. And I was working in nursing homes for, I don't know, several years, when a client that I had asked a question about sexuality, and I was like, "What? Oh, I didn't even know that's like was a thing, I never thought about it. I was treating this client for depression, and I was seeing this client for depression, and the fact that he had some issues with his sexuality I was like dumbfounded because I didn't learn anything during my master's degree in psychology about sexuality. So I started like, well, digging into it, and this was actually like became like a whole like snowball effect because I did like a course on it, and eventually I did like a PhD on it in human sexuality. So it really like set something in motion for me because I was like, why did nobody tell me this? Like, this is awful, and we should know more about this, and we should help people, and we should ask people these questions. So um but one of the consequences like of the bias and the myths is that like a lot of us folks, like professional folks, didn't have any education in sexuality. Some hopefully did, but yeah, unfortunately most of us didn't. And also like a lot of older adults that are now older adults didn't get any information on their changing bodies. They didn't get like sex eds about like how, and still people don't, about how your body changes once you get older. And my children are in high school and they got sex ed, and it's all about like puberty and things that change during that time. But like after that, your body doesn't stop changing after puberty, as we know. At least some of us know. And so it's really important to add that and to normalize your body aging. Also, one of the consequences is that there's an increase of sexual transmitted infection and diseases and HIV among older adults. Also, because they didn't get information, most of them grew up with the idea that you had to protect against pregnancy, and didn't know that you also had to protect yourself against STIs and HIV. One of the other consequences is the medicalization of aging, something like that Maggie already mentioned a little bit. Like that's like younger people are considered like that are beautiful and firm, and they are considered sexy. And as you age, you're not like that, like it's taken away from you almost, like because you're not seen as a sexual being or as sexy. So there are older adults or aging people who change or alter their bodies in order to keep their youthful appearance, with Botox, with facelifts, with going to the gym, and also like buying expensive creams, like dyeing their hair, everything to keep like a youthful like outside look for other people, so you're still like getting the sense of feeling attractive and feeling like sexy. Yeah, you would like to add something,
Natalie,
Maggie? Yeah.
I was going to jump in. I think that this next one, I want to put this in the context of dementia too for folk, is that, you know, certainly the more vulnerable you are in our society, as an older adult, the more pitiable we tend to treat you, right? Which is an unfortunate consequence of cultural ageism, right? And having that happen. And some of the consequences, as you're mentioning, are older women, and in fact, people who are impaired, cognitively impaired and may have dementia, tend to experience more assault than those that are intact, or than older men, and they don't come forward, or they don't know how to come forward, or they can't come forward due to either stigmas or inabilities or incapacities. And because they're our most vulnerable at times in our society, they're also the most invisible and hushed, which I think is another one of these unfortunate consequences. And I want to again try to sit this in the context of dementia, in that if you think that being older and sexual is stigmatizing, being older and sexual with cognitive impairment is a very triple whammy, and you could double down on that and add woman, sexual minority, gender minority, etc. But these compound, right, these stigmatizing identities, and put you even further away from that privileged circle of sexuality, and therefore your information access is less, et cetera. And that's again a chance for us as providers to be very empowering and say, but I can provide you with this, but I see you, and I know that folk are sexual in all and intimate in all kinds of ways. And how can that need that you have be met in that context? And really, getting past all of these biases that we have that bars people away from experiences. So appreciate you cataloging all of these. It's pretty daunting when you look at, but that's why we're here, to empower folk and get them the good information and let them have a voice about this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maggie, for well, telling that story. I was like contemplating, like, should I add it or not? But I think like it's really important to be like fully honest, and also like because these things happen, and so I think it's important to be honest about it and to be open about it, so we can at least, like Maggie said, like talk about it and support. And lastly, I mentioned like the older adults are afraid of being judged negatively. That's mostly in relation to when they talk to like a healthcare provider. since they are very, like most older adults, are very reluctant to share their sexual issues or their sexuality with the healthcare provider, because most healthcare providers don't start the conversation about sexuality. And so older adults who do come in contact with like a professional, they have the tendency to be a little bit reluctant if they do have a question about it. So, but I'll come back to that later. But like it kind of like also piggybacks a little bit of what we mentioned earlier, that it is really important to talk about it with each other. So the healthcare professionals with the older adults and the older adults with the healthcare professionals. So let's move on to the facts. The facts around sexuality. Well, age by itself has no effect on the frequency of sexual activity or on your sexual need or on your sexual behavior per se. But we all know that aging does come with some discomforts or like aches and pains and unfortunately certain illnesses or dementia. So like, yeah, that is something that comes with age, but that's like, and that has an effect on sexuality. So it's more like a secondary effect of sexuality that age has, not like aging in itself. No, you can age like without anything, and then you can keep on having like a sexual life like you're used to. But what are the effects? So what does impact sexuality in folks that are aging? Medication can impact sexuality. The duration of the marriage or like the relationship that you're in, that can have some impact. It's not as huge as people think it is, but it does have some impact. But that means that when you start a new relationship when you're older, that means it's like I've had like people sharing with me in their 70s, 75s, starting a new relationship. Like, I feel like I'm 18 again and I'm acting like I'm 18 again. And so, yeah, so then it's sort of like starts over. Of course, you can have an illness like that can have an effect on sexuality. You know, there's so many like vascular issues, diabetes, Parkinson, dementia is one of them. Sometimes people are admitted in a long-term care or some sort of memory care or care facility that of course also like affects how you can express your sexuality or continue with your sexual life with your partner. And of course, losing a partner has like a huge effect on your sexuality. And these things are more common, not only common, but more common in people when they get older. Not sure if you have anything to add to that, Maggie. No?
Go for it. I think we're
Okay.
up to the next poll.
Yeah.
You're muted, Natalie.
Sorry. Yeah.
Speaking of tech, it's all right.
That happens when you have like all these like buttons to
That's
press,
right.
like getting out of the poll and like back into the slideshow. But yeah, here we are. So what are the influencing factors in sexuality and dementia? Well, it's hard for me to give like get really specific about changes in intimacy and sexuality when people are diagnosed with dementia. And that's not just because there's like different types of dementia, but like of course there's like everybody brings their own personality, their own sexual preference. There are different phases in dementia, as we all know. And of course, like I put it under miscellaneous. There's like medication that I mentioned, or like some like social factors that can play a role, like where you live, or et cetera, et cetera. Like
I'll
Maggie.
just hop in here. I think if from a provider standpoint, when you're thinking about like, how is the person functioning, right, as an individual, what are their challenges that we can support? I think sexuality or sexual expression or intimate expression is just one of those many areas, right? And thinking of it as another area of function, and what components does the person value? What are the needs of the person to connect or to feel intimate touch or to be physical with a partner or with themselves? And how how can those goals be met? And then you think about all of these factors, that Natalie is bringing up here. Certainly the type of dementia may matter. There are certain types of dementia that are more what we call frontal, right? Frontal dysfunction or executive dysfunction that may be more impulsivity related or things, which is, kind of a minority of folks when you think about all of the symptoms that are related to dementia, but they may have something hypersexual, and thinking about how to work around those things and how to support that person in an environment that helps get those impulses met or control those impulses in a way that's good for the context that they're in might be something that providers are thinking about, right? The phase of dementia is a big deal when we think about how progressed is this person in their ability to reason, to have judgment, to think about all the consequences and put them together, to reason about complex relationship kind of things. But at the same token, phases of dementia may not matter, right, Natalie, in that everybody needs touch, right? um Everybody needs intimacy in some way, whether that's emotional, physical, etc. I think Natalie has a great story about a woman who was in very advanced phases of dementia that she was working with in a home, who was rocking and moaning, and all she did was go in and kind of gently touch her arm and be a presence, and that calmed her down, right? Because she needed something like that. So even though phases of dementia matters in terms of maybe the complexity or the intricacies of the type of activity that might be safe or might fulfill this person's need as well, there's always something, right, that we can do as providers to think about what can we do to meet that need, in reducing the risk in the most that we can, but still allowing enough risk, right, that allows them to still be human, right? So there's no risk situation for any of us, but there are lower risk situations, and thinking about how to keep that in mind. Bonnie, I think you're on task here when you think about sexual history under miscellaneous, right? So as a provider and as a partner, right, when you're thinking about someone who has a trauma in their history, and it may be very traumatic for them to respond to something that is more intimate, if they're sort of ability to access those memories or to mitigate those memories emotionally isn't what it used to be when they were not didn't have impairment. So taking into consideration people's sexual histories, their values, their past, their current relationships, and what was happy and good about those relationships when they were able to express it. There's a lot of things that go into this to think about how dementia may influence your expression of intimacy and sexuality. But I think at the root of this is that intimacy can be felt and expressed by anyone at any capacity with any constellation in this picture, as Natalie always says in her research, which I love. And it takes more than just a yes no answer, right? Or a thought of can they, can't they? It's how can they at this level with this person or in this situation at this level of risk. So, we have to get a little more complex in our questions and our thoughts than just can they, can't they? But go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's why I like combined it all. It's really difficult to have like one answer. Like what does it look like?
Yeah.
What does
Yeah.
sexuality actually look like? Sexual expression in dementia? Well, there's not like
Mhm.
one answer. I have tried to let me see, did I get there? Yeah. So these are like a few of the things that um, we see more than other things. This is not like, doesn't mean that this is like everything that what it looks like for you personally or in your experience in your work. But these are kind of like the things that we see more often, and that is that people sometimes don't recognize their spouse or their partner
Mm.
because they're in that phase of dementia, or sometimes it's just like in the morning they are more clear than in the afternoon. So it depends on the time of day. So it can be a lot of factors. There's can also be confusion about during sex, like what's going on, what do you do? Because even though we don't, for us it's, or for us, for people that don't have the dementia, it doesn't seem such a complex task. But we do have to realize that there's a lot of like factors that play a role, and a lot of steps that you usually take when you are
Mhm.
sexually active. And yeah, there can be
Mhm.
confusion about those steps. People with dementia sometimes don't understand that. There can be an increased in interest in sexual closeness, like more often, like Maggie expressed, with people who have some like frontal issues, or sometimes people with dementia and Parkinson's disease combined. There's also like an option that sometimes people get like somewhat have some more in interest, but yeah, it depends. What I've also heard is that from partners is that people with dementia can be focused more on their own pleasure instead of the sexual pleasure of the partner. And like for some people with dementia, the focus from changes sort of from more sexuality to more in intimate needs. So just like touch and cuddling and
Mm.
holding hands or a little kiss. So yeah, and like I said earlier, some become more sexually active, some become less sexually active. Some get
Mhm.
triggered by certain, people undressing might trigger a person.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of, I'm not sure, Maggie, if you have something to add on that,
Mm.
because I think we can like add on the list, but
Certainly. And I think one of the things that I often talk to folk about, so this is getting into like more, it could be a provider supporting a couple or partnership or a person trying to be sexual, or this could be within a personal relationship, is some things change, right? Some things change about your sexual and intimate life across your life course, no matter what. Like, not dependent on if you have disease or you don't have disease, it just happens. But sometimes in older age, and certainly as an adaptation to different chronic illnesses or things that we have challenges with, we have to adapt our sexual lives to things that feel maybe a little weird or different. Like I always tell people, like people think that spontaneity is like necessary to be intimate and sexual, but actually planned intimacy can be just as great. And sometimes when you're thinking about the impact of a challenge on your sexual life, let's say, like in the context of dementia, it might be more planned, right? You may be thinking about what time of day is more likely for this person to be alert, interested, and able to engage, right? So maybe not if they're a sundowner, right? That isn't the great time to approach. We might be scheduling time for intimacy. You may be thinking about the context in which it's more comfortable for someone who has lost orientation to time and place, but maybe it still has it to you as a person, right? So you're thinking about cues in the environment that make this person comfortable to be able to feel like this is an intimate time. Maybe it's giving that person a bath. Maybe it's brushing their hair. Maybe it's giving them a hand massage. It's we're all thinking about these planned adaptations, and it might not sound as sexy on the front end, right? Because it lacks a little bit of that cultural script of, and then he came in the room and he ripped off her bodice, from the romance novels. But at the same token, most of us do have pretty particular sexual scripts that we follow, whether we think of it or not. And planned pleasure is pleasure too, right? So that might be something that changes with dementia in a partnership, is that it becomes a little more planned, a little more structured, a little more thoughtful about what works, right? And trying different things and problem solving with the support of a provider or with the support of yourself, just thinking through what that might be. And certainly Natalie and I would be remiss if we didn't say, sometimes it changes. Sometimes you're, like she says, you become less sexually active, and that's okay by both of you. And maybe it's okay with one and it's not okay with the other. And you work on negotiating those things, or the person finds a more solo sexual life, a more fulfilling. But there will be some adaptations that happen across the course of the dementia. So that's one thing you can plan on always, right? Is change.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you for that. And also, like, we're talking about changes like within the people with dementia, but also like for the partners, of course, there can also be
Hmm.
changes, when you take care of somebody, it changes your dynamic with this person. So yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm like have to keep an eye on the time. So well, just this is like a really quick slide just to say, like, sexuality and intimacy in older adults with dementia is normal, it's healthy, it's beneficial, it's natural slide. So I think it's really important to for everyone to talk about intimacy with your partner or your healthcare professional. These are like things we already talked about, to enjoy intimacy. So it can be sexuality, it can be intimacy, just enjoy being together. Adapt, like the change, like Dr. Syme just like mentioned, because things are going to change. So try to adapt or ask help to adapt to the new circumstances. Join meetings like these. It's really important to be educated on change and to discuss and gather information. Can be through internet or like through us. So we're going to give you the opportunity to gather more information or ask questions.
Okay, before we do that, I just want to make a couple of comments. One is I've never been more conscious, as in this webinar, of the importance of being aware of implicit biases or unconscious stereotypes as we care for others. And certainly this webinar has brought that home, the fact that we want to adopt a person-centered approach where we view each person that we care for as an individual with unique needs and preferences, treating all with dignity and respect. So just that important reminder. And then again, don't put your questions in the chat because we're going to go into two groups. I want to thank our sponsors one more time before we do that: O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home. I also want to mention two webinars coming up. One is a special topic on Tuesday, April 9th. We're going to look at, that's our next webinar. We're going to look at exercise as medicine for brain health. That's our next monthly webinar on Tuesday, April 9th. And then we'll have a special webinar in March on the 27th on end-of-life doulas, empowering the end-of-life journey. So those two great seminars are coming up. And then, of course, you can always go to our website at www.alzoc.org to look at other great education that we offer. Okay, so at this time, we're going to have group one, which would be the professionals. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. Group one is the family members. And they are going to look at that link that Lauren just put in the
See it
chat
now.
box. So all family members Click into the link at this time, please. And then group 2 is staying here. Those are our CE professionals or other professionals who are working with older adults. So I want to give everybody a second to sort of switch gears. All family members, click into the link. And then our professionals are remaining behind to work with Dr. Hutema. Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to jump in and let everybody know that those that are staying in this webinar as the professional, I'm individually going through and giving everybody the ability to talk and not be muted. So if you don't have a immediate question, please remain muted. However, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. Those of you that maybe don't have the ability to have access to a mic, just go ahead and put your questions in the chat and we'll ask them for you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, I have one question. So I go out and my team goes out and does home visits, and we try to connect people with resources and support and all kinds of good stuff. And what we found lately is we're having to have conversation with family members about this and to share that their loved one is still a person that has these needs and desires, and but we're having difficulty having these discussions because family members just seem to be nervous talking about it. So we're trying to normalize it, but I don't know if you have any tips on how we can make people feel a little more comfortable having these talks.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question, because I think every conversation about sexuality, I think it's really important that it comes from the healthcare professionals, because as I mentioned earlier, it is kind of like, can be uncomfortable sometimes for older adults themselves to ask questions. So I really think it is important for the healthcare professionals to start the conversation. I think in order to start the conversation, you have to be comfortable with the subject. And when I'm personally uncomfortable with the subject, I start like babbling. And
Me too.
people will likely like sense that, and they will sense, oh, she's uncomfortable, so this is probably something that I should be uncomfortable about too. So what I when I do my training with professionals, I usually tell them you need to have an opening line. So you need to have some sort of opening line, like in our organization, we value the intimacy or the sexuality of people. We think it's important to talk about it. So is it okay if I ask you a few questions? So it's not just, so you have to have a standard opening line. Can be anything you want, like some older or something like some older adults experience sexuality issues or have some questions about sexuality. Is it okay if I ask you some questions about that? So it's an
Ooh, I
opening
like that.
line, an
I
opening
like
line,
that.
and right after the opening line, you need to ask for permission. Always give the consent to the people you asked it. So is it okay if I ask you a question about it? People need to feel in control, that they can say yes or no. And if they say no, you said that's totally fine. I always say that's totally fine. Just know, if you have any questions, you can always ask me or somebody else from our organization that you are comfortable with, and we will be here for you. It can be today, tomorrow, next week, next year. It's totally fine whenever you are ready to ask these questions. So it's important to do the opening line, ask permission to ask questions, and have some questions ready. If you have the questions that you want to have ready or that you want to ask, have to be open questions. If you have closed questions, then you don't have a conversation about sexuality. It has to be an open question where people can express their thoughts, what their worries are, what their concerns are, what they like, or like whatever they want to tell you about it. they can. So it's really important to have that order. So an opening line, ask for consent, ask for permission to talk about it, and then have an open question. That is a great way to start a conversation about sexuality.
Thank you so much. Also, Doctor, there are questions in the chat if you want to take a look at those, or would you like me to read them to you?
Oh yeah, please read, because I
Okay.
can't. Oh
No
yeah,
problem. No
there's a lot of
problem.
questions in the chat, so maybe you can
Okay.
filter them out.
Sure. I had a group where a participant started talking about spooning.
Sorry,
and
I didn't hear you because somebody
Okay.
was
Okay,
not
they're on
muted.
mute now. I had a group where a participant started talking about spooning, and other members got very uncomfortable. So she's asking, what should I have done, or how should I have handled that?
Yeah, well, I think it's always great when people make remarks about intimacy and sexuality. It might not be the proper group or the proper location, but I would always say, well, it's great that you bring this up, because this is not just an issue maybe for you, but can also be an issue for other people. And then you can like choose, like, is this the correct place to talk about it? Or you can redirect and say something like, maybe this is a more like personal matter. So I think it's important to handle this with care and confidential. And we can discuss it like blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure what kind of group it was or what kind of setting it was, but those are the choices that you have. But I would always respond like, oh, thank you so much for adding this, because I think this is a great subject. You can also ask the group, like, not maybe in that moment, but after you have redirected, like, is this a subject that you would like to talk about sometimes maybe? And then you can at least prepare for it. So that would be my
Great. That's great. How do you handle inappropriate? How should they handle inappropriate sexual behaviors, like in a long-term care setting, or
yeah,
it could be in someone's home?
yeah. Well, I personally don't like the word inappropriate, because I think it has like a judgment to it. I think any sexual behavior should be normalized. However, of course, it can be something when it's addressed to yourself as a healthcare professional. It might not be the correct person that it's addressed to. So I think it's really important to at least express your boundaries in that regard, and also probably discuss it with other healthcare professionals so they are at least aware what's going on, and you can discuss it maybe with that person if that's an option, or with family, or with other healthcare professionals, how you can all as a team make sure that this person doesn't feel the need to express their sexuality. What I always advise healthcare professionals to do is to, of course, if it's like something addressed to yourself or to other older adults who are not able to consent or not consent to something, so it's important to discuss it as a group of professionals, of course, but also to look at, okay, what is this person actually telling us? You know, maybe the behavior that they're expressing is not in the correct place, not the correct time, not towards the correct person, but they are expressing some need that they have. So how can we, instead of like only working towards like, how can we stop this, and how can we like make sure this person doesn't do this, also look, okay, how can we help this person find the right person, find the right place, find the right time, find like whatever, and have some sort of like express their intimacy needs or their sexuality needs within the long-term care.
Okay, thank you. How do you discuss sexuality with a senior who is engaging with multiple partners, even if you use, that opening line that you were talking about?
So how do you start a discussion about that?
How do you talk to a senior who's engaging with multiple partners is the question.
Okay, yeah. Well, like I have no judgment towards people having multiple partners, so I would be maybe have some concern about like sexual transmitted diseases or HIV. Yeah, you still need like some sort of intro, of course. You cannot work through like a general opening line that I discussed earlier. But I do feel it has to be, I think it's really important to start a conversation about this with somebody when you actually have a relationship with that person. So you should have like a really good reason to start a discussion with somebody. So if you have genuine concerns, or maybe something already happened, and so they're not like sexually safe in that regard, yeah, that would be a reason. Maybe then, if that's the case, maybe then the medical professional should start a conversation about how to stay safe and make sure they don't get an STDs. Or it kind of depends on what kind of safety they need. Based on that, you should have the professional that is like the expert in that field to start a discussion on that. But if there's nothing really, like I said, I don't have any judgments toward people who have multiple partners. If you know they're safe, you can ask, like, or maybe, a person who they're really connected to, just ask them randomly, like, hey, I saw, is it still going okay? You are safe, aren't you? You use condoms or whatever. So that can also be like a way to, if you just want to get like a feel of it, maybe they say, yeah, of course I do, and it's all fine. Oh, okay, well then it's if those multiple partners have no issue with it, if it's all consensual, I think, okay, have fun.
Yeah, I was going to add that part about, do we know that there's consent involved with the multiple partners? So I'm
Yeah,
glad you did.
that's the
Yeah,
most
that's pretty
important, I think.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you have any advice if care teams consist of people with different cultural values, where sexual rights of residents are not in line with their own moral beliefs? How can we respect each other's perspective, but at the same time also be an advocate? Oh, I kind of lost it there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, this is like a really important question. So
Yeah, how can you also be
yeah,
an advocate to raise the topic?
yes, that's a
Thank
really
you.
great question, and I think it's a really important question. So I think it's very important to train staff. Because it's okay to have personal preferences. That's totally fine. But I think staff training, and also like the long-term care facility or whatever organization you work for, they need to have sexuality guidelines. So it's clear for everybody what the value of the organization is. And then you can, it's like I said, I will never like judge people or give negative feedback about their personal values, their personal norms. That's totally fine. But however, you work with people who have also their own personal values and their own personal norms. And professional staff is, of course, the, are not the people who are supposed to judge them for it. So they have to remain, that's what you do. You try to make them happy. You try to have them remain their own identity, their own personality, their own preferences. If they prefer certain, I don't know, whatever food, you provide that for them. Or they like prefer to sleep in, like you let them do that, I hope. So, this is just part of that. So I think it's, like I said, it's important to train, and it's also important to have guidelines or policies in place as an organization, because then you can share with the team, like I said, totally fine, that's your value and norms, but every individual client or resident or patient here has their own value and norms, and we respect them all, and we work with that. So it's person-centered. It's not like staff-centered. It's centered towards the person.
Excellent. Okay, this is a scenario where there's a patient living at home with his wife with dementia. They're very loving and respectful of each other. She can't remember conversations for long, so how can he protect himself from possible rape charges? Right now, she's willing and able. So,
Ooh, that's a big question. And
so
a very,
they're at home and they're having sex, and I guess they're wondering if she remembers that she said that was okay. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell how the question is framed.
yeah. Well, this is mostly towards consent. Is this
Yeah.
person able to consent? And I think if this, um, I assume the lady is the one with like, I didn't really,
Yes, the
yeah,
lady has
yeah.
dementia.
Okay. So I think it's like important for the partner if he has concerns about it and is worried about it, or other people have concerns or are worried about it. I think I would try to sort of like gauge whether or not this lady is at least able to express her preferences or say no to other things. Like, do you want, you give them coffee? Said, no, I didn't want any coffee. I want like tea. Okay, and I'll give you so. Or if you give tea and they express something, or like if they have any type of other ways to express preferences or what they want and need, and are able to say, no, I don't want that, or I don't want to take off my coat, or I do want to take off my coat, or and anything like that. I think you could be, and if it is a loving relationship, I think you could generalize that a little bit, and I assume that then she would be also able to express if she doesn't like what he is doing. And of course, but the partner has to listen too. But this is like a really, now I make it like really simplistic, but it's of course way more complex than that. And I would encourage you. You can email me. I think my email address is some of the slides. You can email me because I have some articles about it, and I've done my research on consent and dementia and sexuality. So I can send you some information about it, because, like I said, I'm explaining it a little bit simplistic, but it can be more complex than that. Good question.
We're running
Yes.
over time, but let's take a few more questions, okay?
Hmm.
Along similar lines, how would you handle a situation where a wife has dementia and no longer recognizes her husband, yet he wants to have sex with her?
How
Okay,
you,
so
hmm.
again, the wife has dementia. She doesn't recognize husband, but husband wants to make love.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Is the question coming from the husband, or because that's also really
It-
important, like who has the issue with this? What's the
well, the question is, does the person who asked the question want to reframe it a little bit? Linda, are you able to do that?
Sure.
Thanks.
This was actually a situation in a care home where the staff was very uncomfortable, and the husband would close the door when he went to visit the wife, and the staff was concerned that she really couldn't give consent and that they might get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Linda.
yeah. That's a good addition to the question. Yeah, like you said, it starts with the staff being uncomfortable. So that's sometimes that is related to lack of training in this regard. So I would definitely have a conversation with this gentleman about what's going on, and that there are some concerns, and like talk to him about it, what his experiencing are like, seeing hopefully it is like a, like you said, also like a loving relationship. And I'm not sure if they actually seen them having sexual contact. Maybe he expresses it, but I'm not sure what, we don't know exactly if he closes the door, what is actually happening behind closed doors. So I think it's really important to have an open conversation, but also like a positive conversation. It's not like, oh, we're like really concerned and like this has to stop and we need to protect her, but more like, okay, we want you both to be happy, and yeah, they're like, yeah, you have expressed that. We um like your wife is like unable to express her preferences in this regard. So we just would like to have an open conversation with you on how you handle this, and how we can support you both in having like a positive and connective relationship. Because yeah, you don't really know what's, like I said, what's going on. It's really important to always give people, I think, the benefit of the doubt. We don't really know what's going on, so we need an open conversation with this person to talk about it, but not to, like I said, to like cut it off immediately, but more like, okay, what's going on? Let's talk about it, because there is a slight tendency for staff to feel protective over female clients and female residents. So we need to be sure that this is not just them being protective and seeing the female as sort of like a victim, but she might like enjoy her husband there. She might, even though she may not recognize him by like his name. Maybe she doesn't know she's married, but I have a mother who's in the later stages of Alzheimer's disease. She hasn't said my name for years, but whenever I'm with her, I feel that she like relaxes, and she feels that there is some sort of connection there, and she feels comfortable with my presence, and she allows me to do things like that she wouldn't allow others to do, like putting on her makeup or clipping her nails, which she does detest if other people touch her. She would allow me to do so. So I do feel like there is some sort of like, even though she might not be able to express it, there might be like a sort of sense of comfortableness, of familiarity with this lady. So, and like I said, it's like, it can also be, they might be just laying together and holding hands, or be intimate in some other way. But like I say, yeah, it is kind of complex, of course, consent always. And but I think like training is so important. Staff training is so important.
And actually, Dr. Hutima, we're going to end on that note with a question that says, are there any screening tools that can be used to further assess challenges in sexuality? Any books that you can recommend to further increase our knowledge in this subject?
Oh, there are a lot of books. Maggie and I also wrote an article on sexuality and consent recently. If you would like a copy, you can send either her or me an email. We can send you a copy of that. There are books. Yeah, I have like a zillion of them. So it kind of depends on what specific you need, if you work in like a long-term care or not.
What
But
about the screening? I'm sorry to interrupt. What
oh, the
about the
screening.
screening tools? I just wanted to remind you of that part of the question.
Yeah. There is like a screening tool. I actually have developed in my research sort of like a screening tool on like how to determine consent, sexual consent in people with dementia. However, it's not like a simple yes or no screening tool, because like we discussed already earlier, it's like a very complex issue, and sexuality looks different for everyone. Dementia look different for everyone. And so it's not like like I said, you can like check boxes and know, oh, this person can consent or not consent. It's also like a conversation to have with other staff, with family, etc., etc. But yeah, there is like a screening tool, but people can reach out, and I can send it to them.
Wonderful. Well, listen, thank you, Dr. Hutima, and I see that Dr. Syme is back online with us. We thank you both for this very, very interesting and important topic today. As we end the webinar for everyone, don't forget that an evaluation will open up. We ask you to complete that for your CE credit. And don't forget, you can go to our website. Again, it's www.alzoc.org for information about more of our seminars and events. All right. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to our presenters, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.